What would you think if, after 12 years of marriage, your husband left you with just one cold message? I'm leaving with someone else. I've withdrawn all the money from our account too. Haha. No face-to-face goodbye, no apology, just a single chilling text, and all your shared savings gone. This isn't a movie. This is real life. This is the story of Claire, a 38-year-old woman, the resilient owner of a small but thriving boutique. And what makes this story extraordinary isn't the shock Claire endured, but the way she responded. She didn't cry, she didn't lash out, she didn't play the victim. Calm and prepared, she made her betraying husband pay the price with everything he had thrown away. His reputation, his money, his love, his career, and even his financial freedom. In this story, you'll follow Claire's entire journey from pain to triumph. Every step, every strategy, every cool-headed but brilliant decision that turned her into a new icon for independent, courageous, and resilient women. And if you're in a relationship that makes you doubt, if you've ever been betrayed or hurt so deeply that your trust was shattered, this story is the powerful medicine you need today. It all begins the moment Claire received that message, and from there, a silent but brilliant plan for retribution began. That day started like any other in Claire's life. She opened her boutique at 9 a.m. The gentle early spring air slipped through the large glass windows, carrying the warm scent of milky coffee and the soft hum of jazz from a small speaker behind the counter. Everything was pristine, from the neatly arranged pastel dresses to Claire's every gesture. A crisply ironed blouse, her hair neatly pinned up, and a polite but warm smile for every customer. No one could have guessed that, in just a few minutes, her entire world would turn upside down. At around 10:17 a.m., while processing a payment for a regular customer, Claire's phone buzzed. A message from Mark, her husband of 12 years. She didn't open it right away, but then it buzzed again. And again, a woman's intuition is never wrong. Claire excused herself to the customer, picked up her phone, and opened the screen. "I'm gone. Don't look for me. Melissa and I are on our way to Miami. Oh, and I've withdrawn all the money from our joint account. Ha ha ha." Just one message, a few short sentences, and everything they'd built together crumbled in an instant. Claire stood frozen. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't drop the phone. Her eyes widened for a few seconds. They say the first reaction is instinct, the second is strength. And Claire, from that very first moment, chose strength. She placed the phone on the counter, smiled at the customer, and completed the transaction as if nothing had happened. Only when the last customer left did Claire hang a "closed for 15 minutes" sign on the glass door and lock it. Not a sob. Not a tear. She didn't call Mark. She didn't text back. The first person she called was her lawyer, someone she'd quietly contacted 2 months earlier. "We saw this coming. The plan starts now," the lawyer's calm voice came through. "Do it," Claire replied without hesitation. "Make it quick." She immediately sent the messages Mark had just sent, those boastful, mocking words, dripping with smugness about his betrayal. Each message was evidence, not just for the courtroom, but for Claire's own life. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined it. She wasn't the one at fault. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. Mark kept texting, this time with even more glee. "Too old to keep up with youth. Melissa doesn't have to try. You'll spend your life trying. I left you that old jacket. Suits you better. We're drinking champagne. You still alive?" Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. She opened the storage area behind the boutique and pulled out a worn brown leather notebook. Inside was everything. The dates and times Mark came home late, receipts from expensive restaurants that didn't match his work schedule, hotel bills with unfamiliar names, and even a blurry photo she'd secretly taken when she saw him talking intimately with a young woman in his car. She hadn't confronted him. She'd observed and documented, not out of weakness, but because she knew if the day came to end things, she'd end them from a position of preparation. That afternoon, Claire reopened the boutique on time. The same young employee was there to assist with fittings. The same click of high heels echoed on the wooden floor, and the same gentle smile greeted every customer's question about prices. Claire seemed untouched by the blow she'd just received. But inside, she was plotting her counterattack, cold and precise. That evening, she sat at the dining table alone, no TV, no background music. Just her laptop screen with the bank account open. She reviewed every transaction, marking irregularities, saving them to a file, and sending them to her lawyer. Then she checked the hotel bookings Mark had made, most of which read, "Couple deluxe, 2 nights." The words stung like a knife, but Claire didn't let them have that power. She opened her journal and wrote a single line. "This is the moment I realized. A woman shouldn't be weak for a weak man. I wasn't abandoned. I was set free." Mark wasn't the abusive type. He didn't yell in her face or insult her outright. Instead, he used subtler psychological jabs, mocking glances, snide comments about her age, careless but cutting comparisons. He made Claire feel outdated, old-fashioned, less valuable than Melissa's youthful 20s. But that very betrayal, silent, calculated, and mocking, made Claire more clear-headed than ever. When everyone thought she'd collapse, Claire stood tall. When Mark thought he was 1 step ahead, Claire was already 3 months ahead. And while he laughed smugly on his way to Miami, he had no idea. He'd just stepped into a chess game Claire had designed. She didn't need to retaliate. She didn't need to confront Melissa. She didn't need to say a word. Because she knew revenge isn't about shouting to feel better. It's about silence and victory. Claire wasn't the paranoid type, but she was an excellent observer. The changes didn't come with a bang, but with faint whispers. The chime of a text message, Mark quickly silenced when he walked through the door. The unfamiliar perfume lingering on his shirt collar. The stammering nonsense when she asked, "Who'd you have lunch with today?" At first, Claire told herself, maybe he's stressed. Everyone has quiet phases, but the silence stretched on, and it carried the scent of betrayal. Mark started coming home late, often and without reason. Oddly, his income stayed the same. No raises, no new contracts. So what were these client dinners really about? Claire didn't ask. She didn't push. She just watched. He changed his phone password. The first time in 12 years, Claire wasn't allowed to know it. He placed his phone face down on the table. Every time it buzzed, his eyes darted from her to the screen. Once, when Claire approached from behind and rested a hand on his shoulder, Mark flinched, like a thief who hadn't hidden the evidence in time. One night, while gathering laundry, Claire found a receipt in Mark's pocket. Dinner for 2 at an upscale French restaurant, a place they'd never been together, dated for a time he'd claimed to be in a company meeting. Claire folded the receipt and placed it in her desk drawer, not to forget, but to remember. She didn't confront Mark. Instead, the next day, she opened a separate bank account under her maiden name. She gradually transferred money from her personal savings into it, little by little, without raising suspicion. When the joint account was left with just enough to keep Mark complacent, Claire stopped. The following month, Mark started spending more. New clothes, expensive cologne, even a premium gym membership he'd once mocked as vain. Claire didn't ask. She quietly opened an Excel file named Mark Observations and logged every detail like a seasoned investigator. Around that time, Claire began waking up earlier, not to work, but to think. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and asked herself, if Mark leaves tomorrow, what will I do? That question, painful as it was, helped her start preparing. She met with a lawyer for the first time on a dreary Wednesday. Light rain falling. In a thick coat and without makeup, Claire sat across from a middle-aged woman and said softly, "I'm not sure anything's wrong, but I need to be ready if I'm not wrong." The lawyer nodded and handed her a list of things to collect. Bank statements, credit card receipts, hotel names, text messages, transaction histories, even vague email exchanges. Claire did it all, meticulously, as precisely as she arranged dresses in her boutique. She also reviewed her legal documents. Her boutique, thankfully, was established before the marriage. She'd kept it entirely separate from their joint finances. The lease agreements, business licenses, and accounting records were all in her name. Though Mark had often suggested merging for convenience, Claire always refused, not out of suspicion, but because she believed what you build, you keep. The house they lived in, inherited from her grandmother, was also solely in Claire's name. Mark had once said, "Add my name to it for responsibility's sake," but Claire shook her head. She cited inconvenience. But deep down, she knew, some things, once lost, can't be regained. Then one day, Mark used their joint credit card to book a hotel, the Golden Palm, the same place Claire had seen on an old receipt. But this time, he was careless. The system sent a confirmation email to an old address he'd forgotten to remove access to. Claire saw the name Melissa, the date, the details for a honeymoon suite, and a note about a 3-month anniversary. Claire didn't cry. She took a screenshot, sent it to her lawyer, and for the first time, she wrote in her journal a single firm line. "He's betraying me, but I won't betray myself." From that day, Claire started a morning routine. 15 minutes of walking, 10 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes of gratitude, not to stay in shape, but to stay grounded. She read books on asset protection, learned how to safeguard her business during a divorce, asked her lawyer about freezing accounts, and studied the process for an emergency divorce. She prepared like it was a campaign, not against Mark, but to preserve her own worth. When Mark bragged about his glamorous business trips, Claire watched him like an actor in a play. The lead was engrossed in his role, but the audience already knew the ending. And what Mark didn't know was she'd already written the script for her counterattack, positioned every piece on the board, and had her lawyer waiting in the wings. Betrayal is never a sudden shock to someone who's learned to observe. It's like a cracked glass, one touch, and it shatters. Claire didn't wait for the glass to break into pieces. She saw the crack and chose to hold it together while preparing a new glass, stronger, more beautiful, and hers alone. Mark thought Claire was a docile, gentle, weak wife. He didn't know she was becoming a woman he'd never be worthy of again. He didn't know that, while he laughed with Melissa, Claire was learning to walk forward without looking back. Because she knew, betrayal doesn't destroy a woman. It awakens an entirely new one. And Claire, she had awakened. The night after that divorce message, Claire didn't cry. She ate a cold salad, sipped half a glass of red wine, and washed the dishes as usual. But every small action, every step from the living room to the porch, carried a clear purpose: to begin. No more preparing. It was time to strike back. Mark thought he'd made the first move in the game, but he had no idea Claire had been holding the pieces for months, waiting for him to shorten his own moves with his smug arrogance. That night, Claire opened her laptop and accessed their bank account, the one Mark had confidently claimed to have drained. Sure enough, the balance was nearly zero. But Claire wasn't surprised. That account, to her, was just a shell kept up for the sake of marital appearances. The real money, the important money, she'd transferred long ago, safe under a name only she and the bank knew. The joint credit card was another story. There, Claire saw a string of recent transactions from the past 3 hours. Plane tickets to Miami, a luxury hotel booking, a prepaid seaside dinner, and a bill for vintage Dom Perignon. She took a deep breath, not out of anger, but because she knew this was the moment to act. Claire picked up the phone and called the credit card company's hotline. Her voice was clear, calm. "I'd like to report a series of fraudulent transactions. The card is being used without authorization. I have proof via text messages showing the card holder's lack of consent. I can send them immediately." She sent screenshots of Mark gloating to Melissa about using his wife's money for their trip. She sent the mocking texts with their laughing emojis. She sent the account history showing Claire had paid every bill Mark had only spent. Within 30 minutes, the card was frozen. The plane tickets were canceled. The hotel booking was reversed. Claire didn't feel triumphant. She just felt lighter. Because this wasn't revenge. This was reclaiming power. The next morning, Claire was at her lawyer's office early. In her hand was a thick file of prepared evidence. Financial records, spending logs, photos, bank statements, and all of Mark's text messages. The lawyer skimmed the hefty stack and nodded. Less than 24 hours since he left, and you've got enough legal evidence to file for divorce. I've seen strong women, but you're something else. Claire didn't respond. She only said one thing. I spent 12 years trusting the wrong person. I don't need 12 more minutes to fix it. They filed the divorce papers that day, but Claire instructed, don't send the documents to Mark yet. Let him think he's still in control. Let him keep living free until he gets the court summons. Surprise is a weapon, and she planned to use it at the right moment. Meanwhile, Mark kept texting. The messages poured in from his familiar number, shifting from mockery to taunting to blaming. You're so cold, not even asking how I'm doing. Keep acting superior. You don't know who you're losing. Melissa says you're a saint who plays the part. She's right. Claire didn't reply. Every message she saved. Took screenshots, sent straight to her lawyer. She didn't argue. She built a case. Because when it came to court, emotions held no weight. Only evidence spoke the truth. That evening, after the boutique closed, Claire brewed a pot of hot tea. She sat on her balcony, watching the distant traffic, and thought back to the last time Mark held her hand. How long had it been? That grip had already been loose, but she'd held on tightly, not out of love, but out of habit. Now she'd let go, not because she was tired, but because she was strong enough to stand alone. Exactly 3 days later, Melissa posted a story online. Some people think they're clever, but they're just a joke. Beneath it was a photo of 2 cheap cocktails on a plastic table at a bar on the city's outskirts. Claire glanced at it once and turned off her screen. She didn't need confirmation that her plan was working. Mark started calling. No more texts, real calls, late at night, at dawn. Through the hum of the air conditioner, Claire heard Mark's voice, weak and lost. Can you send me some money? My card's blocked. Claire didn't answer. She just stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, she smiled. Not because he was suffering, but because at last she'd stopped letting herself get hurt. A week later, the court summons was delivered to Mark. Claire knew because he called immediately after. Are you insane? You're taking me to court. For the first time, Claire responded. One sentence, slow and clear. I'm not taking you anywhere. I'm taking myself away from you. She hung up, didn't wait for a reply. Because a counterattack doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it's just a decisive choice, a purposeful silence, and a belief that you deserve a better life. Claire didn't need to beat Mark. She just needed to beat the old version of herself. The one who'd turned a blind eye, made excuses for the unforgivable, held onto a man who'd let her go long ago. She'd won, and that was a victory no one could take away. The news of Mark leaving his wife for a woman nearly 20 years younger than Claire spread faster than summer sale promotions. Just days after Mark vanished from Claire's life with a mocking text, the entire town seemed to know. Not because Claire told anyone. She said nothing, but some stories tell themselves. When a man known as Claire's husband, the woman who built a boutique from scratch, quietly drained their joint account and ran off with his mistress, no exaggeration was needed. The truth was shocking enough. The first call didn't come from friends, but from Barbara, Mark's mother. She called Claire early one morning, her voice sharp with blame. What did you do to make Mark leave like that? He said you were controlling, cold, suffocating him. He's just looking for happiness, Claire. Claire didn't interrupt. She sat quietly with her coffee, listening until Barbara sighed and fell silent. Only then did Claire speak softly. If you want the truth, I can show you every message. The ones where Mark laughed at my pain, called me old hag. bragged about using my card to spoil someone else. The line went quiet. Not long after, Barbara called back. Her voice was different, hesitant, slow, and for the first time, remorseful. I didn't know Mark could be so cruel. He was never like this, or maybe he hid it from us all. Claire said nothing more. Her former mother-in-law, once so warm, once calling her daughter, hung up quietly. Some shocks don't need to be delivered. The truth alone is enough to shatter illusions. A few days later, Mark's sister, Amanda, showed up at the boutique. She stood at the entrance, her face pale, eyes red and swollen. "Claire," Amanda faltered. "I believed him. I thought he was hurt because he wasn't loved right. I'm so sorry." Claire didn't blame her. She only said, "It's okay. You believed because you cared. But love shouldn't be blind." Amanda nodded, then hugged Claire like she was embracing a war survivor. From then on, Amanda became Claire's most loyal customer. She didn't just shop. She promoted the boutique on social media, referred friends, and even offered to help with marketing when Claire opened a new branch. Then the community began to react. Many who knew Claire as the gentle woman behind the small boutique counter now saw her differently, with admiration, sympathy, and awe at her rare composure. Women came to the boutique not just for dresses. They came to witness a woman who could stand tall after a direct hit to the heart. They shared their own stories with Claire. They teared up when she smiled and said, "You can't change people, but you can change how you live after they hurt you." A single mother once cried by the dress rack, then laughed when Claire said, "You can lose a person, but never lose yourself." A young regular customer brought Claire a handwritten letter saying, "You made me believe divorce isn't the end. It can be the prelude to a new life." In the community, no one sided with Mark, except a few old drinking buddies, who also faded away after hearing the full story. Mark, once the husband of a successful woman, became a cautionary tale for those who trade decency for impulsiveness. And Claire, she didn't need to speak. Her actions and calm spoke for her. And in that silence, she heard support she'd never noticed before. Women from all ages and backgrounds saw parts of themselves in Claire, not because they'd been betrayed, but because they understood. Rising after betrayal is what's truly admirable. The boutique became more than a clothing store. It restored faith. Every item was chosen not just for beauty, but for the feeling. I'm taking care of myself, even if the world turns its back. Claire never vented online. She didn't post about Mark. She didn't write bitter rants. But those who came to her seemed to understand. She'd walked through a storm and emerged, her clothes unrumpled. And in their hearts, she was no longer Mark's ex-wife. She was Claire, a woman who knew her worth, no reminders needed. That Monday, a light rain fell. It wasn't heavy, but enough to make the sidewalks slick, turning high-heeled shoes unsteady. But for Claire, nothing that day could throw her off balance, not even Mark's presence. He arrived at the courthouse in a silver gray suit, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was unkempt, and the bold red tie was perhaps the last remnant of the days. He thought he was younger than his age. Claire didn't look at him. She entered the courtroom like she was walking into an important meeting, focused, steady, unwavering. In her hand was a thick, neatly bound file labeled Mark Financial Evidence. Her lawyer, a petite Asian woman with piercing eyes, nodded as Claire sat down. They were thoroughly prepared. The hearing began with an urgent agenda, freezing joint assets, demanding Mark repay the money he'd illegally withdrawn, and clarifying ownership of the boutique and Claire's home. Mark's lawyer, a polished man with salt and pepper hair, started by painting Mark as a husband emotionally abandoned, claiming Claire was too focused on work in recent years, and that Mark was only seeking a new, youthful, freer life. Claire stayed silent. Then her lawyer stood, her gaze sharp as a freshly drawn blade. "We won't debate emotions, we'll discuss evidence, and the evidence shows. My client was financially betrayed, her joint account drained without notice, her credit card used for a romantic getaway with a third party, and she was mocked with insulting texts. It's all in the file. She presented the file to the judge, each page numbered, each image printed clearly, each text annotated in detail. Mark began to sweat, his hands clenched, his eyes darting, avoiding Claire's. He couldn't have imagined that while he was gleefully planning his new life on Miami beaches, the woman he deemed weak had quietly gathered everything to bring him to justice. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a steely voice, flipped through the file and looked up at Mark. "Are you aware that such financial actions could constitute fraud?" Mark stammered, I just took my share. We're married." Claire's lawyer swiftly countered, "No, Your Honor, that money wasn't his share. It was joint property, undivided. Withdrawing it all without consent is a violation. Furthermore, the boutique was established and registered before the marriage, with all transactions in Claire's name and finances completely separate. The house, too, is inherited property. Mark has no claim." Mark's lawyer tried to argue that since the boutique thrived during the marriage, Mark deserved a share of its profits or valuation. Claire stood. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear, resolute. "Your Honor, I built the boutique with my own hands, brick by brick, customer by customer. I never used a cent from our joint account to maintain or expand it. I worked every day from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., while Mark doesn't even know how our inventory system works. He never helped at the boutique, not an hour, not a day, and I have full accounting records to prove it." The judge nodded, quietly taking notes. The hearing ended after nearly 3 hours. The ruling was immediate. All joint financial accounts were frozen. Mark was ordered to repay the withdrawn money within 24 hours, or face charges for misusing joint assets. The boutique and house were confirmed as Claire's sole property, beyond Mark's claim. The judge looked at Mark one last time. "You can choose a new love, but you cannot take someone else's lifelong work to fund your new start. This is your first lesson, and I hope it's your last." Mark bowed his head. He had no defense left. Claire left the courtroom with steps lighter than a spring breeze, not because she'd won, but because she'd reclaimed justice. And justice, sometimes, doesn't come from the court, but from being prepared, staying resolute, and choosing the right moment to stand. She didn't glance at Mark as she passed him in the lobby. She didn't need to. Because the victor doesn't need to gloat. The victor just walks away, unburdened. After that hearing, Mark didn't return to town. He vanished as if fleeing not from the court's ruling, but from the consequences of his own reckless choices. But Miami, the paradise he'd hoped would restore his youth, turned out to be an expensive and fleeting illusion. With the credit card frozen, Mark and Melissa couldn't check into their hotel as planned. They argued at the front desk, scrambling for solutions. Meanwhile, Claire received an email. "Refund successful for fraudulent transactions." She didn't smile or celebrate. She simply marked the email as handled, like a task completed. Out of money, Mark booked a room at a rundown motel near the airport with bleach-scented sheets and creaking doors. Melissa, the young woman who thought she was living a dream, faced reality. The mature, successful man she'd bragged about to friends was living off his ex-wife's account. Mark grew irritable. He demanded Melissa cover expenses. She refused. He complained about how Claire ruined his life, how she got revenge like a pro, how he just wanted to live quietly. Melissa looked at him, slumped on a rickety bed, shirt wrinkled, hair disheveled, and realized this wasn't an admirable man. This was an overgrown boy playing at reinvention without knowing the rules. Less than 2 weeks later, Melissa left. No letter, no long goodbye, just a note. "I don't want to live like this. I need a man, not an unfinished project." Mark buried his head in his hands. The short-term rental apartment felt cold. No laughter, no champagne, no white sheets or roses like in the beginning. Just him and the bills. In desperation, Mark tried calling Claire. No more smug tone, just pleading. "Can you help me one last time? You know I'm struggling." Claire didn't answer. Instead, she messaged her lawyer, "If he harasses me further, I'm ready to file a restraining order." Mark returned to his old job after 3 weeks' absence, but he wasn't welcomed back. His sudden departure mid-project, combined with rumors of abandoning his wife for a younger subordinate, prompted HR to review his file. He was called in, asked to explain, and ultimately received a restructuring notice, a polite way of pushing him out without a fuss. With an unstable financial history and a tarnished reputation, Mark struggled to find new work. He applied everywhere, even for roles far below his previous level, but doors closed, not for lack of skill, but for lack of trust. 4 months later, Mark moved back in with his parents, in their small suburban home, a place he'd sworn he'd never return to. He slept in his old teenage bedroom, where high school football posters still hung, now reflecting a 45-year-old man, jobless, divorced, and penniless. Mark tried dating apps. He described himself as athletic, loves travel, former senior manager, launching a personal project. He used old photos, ones with Melissa on the beach, but no one responded. In a small town, rumors travel far. Everyone knew the guy who left his wife via text and drained their account. Though no one openly berated Mark, society's doors slowly closed on him. Old friends drifted away. Former colleagues who once respected him now used him as a cautionary tale of one wrong move, a ruined life. And Melissa, she started a channel about mental health, sharing her story of being swept into a misguided relationship with an older man and losing direction. No names, but everyone knew. Oddly, she spoke with gratitude, because leaving Mark taught her how to stand on her own and stop running from herself. Mark, sitting in his childhood room, watched her video, eyes red. Not from pain, but because for the first time, he saw himself clearly. A man who had everything and lost it, not because of anyone else, but because of his own recklessness, arrogance, and blind confidence. The price Mark paid wasn't just money, love, or reputation. It was realizing too late that the one person who'd ever stood by him, Claire, was the first he'd turned his back on. Six months after the divorce, Claire stood in front of her boutique, now with a freshly painted facade, a new sign, and a red ribbon waiting to be cut. No longer the tiny shop on the corner where she'd started with a few dresses on wooden racks, Claire's boutique now had a second branch. The opening wasn't extravagant, but it drew attention. The local paper covered it. A small TV station interviewed her. The host began, "You're not just a successful entrepreneur. You're a symbol of a woman's strength to rise from brokenness and start anew." Claire smiled gently. "Actually, I didn't start anew. I just returned to who I really am, without having to fight to hold on to what wasn't worth keeping." Behind that smile were sleepless nights, days juggling work and legal meetings, and the effort to keep herself from slipping into resentment. She chose to heal, not by forgiving Mark, but by freeing herself from the victim's role. The second boutique was in the city center, near offices where working women shopped for something beautiful to treat themselves after a tough week. Claire designed the space to reflect her vision: elegant, comfortable, and free. Not too luxurious to feel distant, not too common to lose its identity. On the wall hung a small frame, unnoticed by others, but Claire knew its meaning well. It was Mark's final text, printed and framed, the breakup message ending with "ha ha ha ha." Below it, in her handwriting, was a small note: "Success is the best response." She didn't keep it to dwell on pain. She kept it to remind herself. There was a day someone thought she'd crumble. But she didn't just survive. She grew. A year after the divorce, Claire opened a third branch, this time with the support of women who'd gone from customers to friends to partners. She didn't just sell dresses. She started a blog on the boutique's website, sharing stories, not just about fashion, but about starting over. Each post was a slice of her journey: how to open a separate bank account, how to protect assets during marriage, what women should prepare, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. Claire was invited to speak at women's business conferences. At first, she declined. She didn't see herself as a speaker. But after a trial talk, where dozens clapped endlessly as she closed with, "You don't need to take revenge. You just need to become someone they can never reach again," Claire realized. She had something worth sharing. 2 years later, the Claire chain, a play on reclaim and her name, had 5 branches nationwide, an online store with thousands of monthly orders, and a team of 30 employees, mostly women who'd faced their own brokenness and were rediscovering themselves. She hired not just for skills, but for attitude. Every new employee was asked, "What's the biggest thing you've overcome?" In their answers, Claire found her team, people who knew loss but refused to let it define them. In an interview with a national magazine, the reporter asked, "What are you most proud of after all this?" Claire didn't mention revenue, branches, or successful revenge. She said, "I'm proud that I still chose peace, even when I had every right to be angry." Once, at a New York workshop, after Claire's talk, a young woman stood and asked, "If you could go back to the moment Mark sent that text, would you do anything differently?" Claire thought briefly, then nodded. "Yes, I'd thank him sooner. Thank him for leaving just when I was ready to truly live." The room erupted in applause, not because it was a profound answer, but because it came from someone who'd walked the full path, from pain, panic, silent preparation, and resilient recovery to the heights of success, without losing herself. One cloudy Saturday afternoon, Claire was busy arranging a new display in the boutique when a stranger walked in. A woman in her 20s, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, but Claire recognized her instantly. It was Melissa. Gone was the defiant gaze, the bold red lipstick from the photos Mark had flaunted online. Melissa stood at the entrance, clutching her bag tightly. Claire, without a word, nodded, a silent invitation. Melissa approached, removed her glasses. Her eyes were red but resolute. "Can you listen to me for a few minutes?" Her voice trembled slightly. Claire gestured to a chair in the customer lounge. Not quite forgiveness, not rejection, just openness. Melissa began, unhurried, without excuses. She hadn't known Mark was still living with Claire when their relationship began. He'd said they were estranged, living out of duty, emotionally distant. Like many young women, she'd been drawn to the story of a worldly man who said exactly what she wanted to hear. "I thought I was special. I thought you were cold, successful, uncaring. I thought you didn't love him anymore, and I was completely wrong." Claire stayed silent, but her gaze softened, the look of someone far enough from the wound to no longer feel its sting. Melissa bowed her head. "I want to apologize, truly, not to be forgiven, but to stop feeling like I'm living wrong." A brief silence passed. Then Claire spoke, softly and clearly. "You don't need my forgiveness to live better. You just need to not repeat that mistake, with others or yourself." Melissa nodded, tears welling. They didn't embrace, they didn't cry. There was just a quiet peace in the room, a wordless forgiveness. From that day, Melissa became a regular customer, quietly, without fanfare. Each visit, she picked a small item, paid quickly, and left. Once, Claire overheard her tell an employee, "Claire's the first person who made me think, living kindly can also be really cool." Soon after, Melissa started a small media consulting firm, helping young women build positive personal brands online. She once messaged Claire privately, "I was inspired by how you stood strong. Even after being knocked down, you didn't choose bitterness. You chose to shine brighter." Not just Melissa. Mark's family, once against Claire, began to shift. Barbara, her former mother-in-law, sent a handwritten card on Claire's birthday. "You're no longer my daughter-in-law, but I'll always see you as the only woman who loved my son with true kindness." I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Amanda, Mark's sister, after joining Claire at a women's entrepreneurship workshop, cried on the spot, saying, "Claire didn't just save herself, she taught our whole family what self-respect means." And Mark? He lived in a small apartment above his parents' garage, working as a technician at a local computer shop. He still claimed he was taking a break to redefine himself, but others saw a tired, middle-aged man with weary eyes and a habit of styling his hair like he used to, as if clinging to a version of himself that no longer existed. Mark occasionally filed appeals for asset division, all rejected. Once, Claire stumbled across his online dating profile. He still described himself as once successful, restarting my career, loves travel and adventure. She didn't laugh. She didn't get angry. She just scrolled past, like seeing a familiar name in an old book. Because for Claire, that chapter was closed. Not because she forgot, but because she'd written new ones, more beautiful, deeper, and more memorable. Claire's office sat on the top floor of her largest boutique branch, a once distant dream, now a reality in her hands. The space wasn't vast, but it was bright and quiet, perfect for writing emails, sketching plans, or simply watching the bustling street below with a quiet smile. On her desk was a single small frame. Not a family photo, not an award, but Mark's final text, printed and carefully framed. "I'm gone. I've withdrawn all the money, ha ha ha." Below it, in Claire's handwriting, was a small note. "Success is the best response." Many asked why she kept it. Why not throw it away? Why not erase all traces? Claire always answered with a calm smile. "Because I don't keep it to remember the pain. I keep it to never forget that I walked through it without losing myself." That was part of Claire's legacy, not for the world, but for herself. A milestone. A reminder that she'd been underestimated, abandoned, trampled. And in those lowest moments, she'd picked herself up, gathered her pieces, and built a better version of herself without needing anyone's validation. She didn't become a successful entrepreneur to spite Mark. She built her empire to prove the greatest love a woman can give is to herself at the right time. Claire never spoke with bitterness. At conferences, she didn't paint Mark as a villain. She spoke about herself, what she did, prepared, and decided in silence. She talked about women's financial autonomy, the importance of keeping assets separate when needed, and never handing over the keys to your life to anyone, even a spouse. Once, at a university workshop, a freshman asked, "What's the biggest lesson you've learned?" Claire didn't hesitate long. She said, "That no one can destroy your life unless you let them." She paused, then added, "And that silence at the right moment is sometimes the loudest voice." Claire wasn't just a model of success after failure. She was living proof that a woman can be hurt without seeking vicious revenge. She could forgive without weakness. She could let go without needing someone to leave first. Each Rue Claire branch didn't just sell clothes. It sold the feeling, "I am enough," a feeling Claire took 12 years and a betrayal to find. And now she helped other women discover it without enduring the same pain. Her employees, from a 50-year-old divorcee to a young woman scarred by her first relationship, were trained not just in products, but in values. At every Monday meeting, Claire said something thought-provoking. Once, she said, "We don't just sell dresses, we sell confidence, and sometimes customers come not to buy, but to believe they can still be beautiful in their own eyes." That was Claire's legacy. Not revenue, not fame, but creating a small world where women weren't judged by their past, but admired for how they rose. One late autumn afternoon, the sky was still. Claire stepped out of the boutique after a long staff meeting. Golden leaves fell slowly, one by one, as if deciding whether to stay or let go. The air was cool but not biting, like an ending accepted without resistance. She took the small road home, passing an old cafe where she and Mark used to sit during their dating days. As students, dreamers, naive enough to think love was enough. The cafe's glass reflected a woman in a long coat, hair neatly pinned, walking with confidence. Claire paused, looking at herself. No elaborate makeup, no flashy jewelry, but she had a unique glow, the light of someone who'd walked through darkness and kept the fire in her heart. She smiled faintly, not from regret or nostalgia, but because everything had finally found its place. In life, some doors slam shut, leaving you reeling, but others close slowly, giving you time to realize you no longer want to go back. Claire had stood before many such doors: the bedroom door where Mark lied, the bank door where she opened her own account, the courtroom door where she stood for justice, the first boutique door where she risked starting over, and now, her own door. At home, Claire brewed a cup of ginger tea and sat by the window, watching the last sunlight stretch across the wooden floor. The sound of cars faded in the distance. No more calls from lawyers, no frantic texts from an ex, just the steady beat of her heart, at peace. On the table was an unsealed letter. She was writing it unfinished. Not to Mark, not to Melissa, but to herself 5 years ago. Dear Claire, who sat in the dark yet smiled for others. I want to tell you, you're not weak. You just didn't know how strong you are. One day, you'll look back at everything that brought you down and thank it, because it lifted you higher than anyone who ever left you. She folded the letter, didn't send it, and placed it in a drawer where she kept important things: copies of business documents, old photos, and the first letter she wrote to herself after the divorce, promising never to live small for anyone again. Dusk fell. Claire drew the curtains, turned on the desk lamp. Outside, streetlights began to glow, one by one, like hope, not rushing in, but arriving right on time. And Claire knew more than ever, when you close the door that made you cry every night, you open the one that leads to yourself, clear, independent, and free. Life's train doesn't stop at the Betrayal station. It moves on. And Claire, she'd boarded the first car of a new journey, carrying no one unworthy, unburdened by faded memories. She carried only one thing, forever: the belief that a woman who loves herself cannot be abandoned without loss. She didn't need to defeat anyone. She just needed to defeat the old her, the one who waited for someone who never returned. And now, at the journey's end, she didn't say goodbye. She simply closed the door and kept walking.